Hi there, and thanks so much for joining me for another tutorial. My name is Erin Eno, and today we're going to be painting this Misty Meadow Landscape. It's really beginner friendly, so if you enjoy it and want to see more beginner friendly tutorials, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to know when I have new videos out. So now let's just jump in and get painting. So to start, I'll just run through my materials for you. Today I'm using my Baohong Academy cold press watercolor paper. It's 140 pound, 100% cotton. I've trimmed it down to roughly 5.5 by 8, and I've taped it all around to a board. We're going to be using a lot of water, so you do need to tape this to a board so it doesn't buckle on you. I have my Royal Talons Van Gogh paints, 2 jars of water, a paper towel, and for brushes today I am using my Curry's 2500 series in a size 10 round, their 2400 series in a size 6 round, and I've got a Princeton snap in a 0. So to start, because we want to keep this pretty wet throughout the whole, well, throughout the majority of the painting, I'm just going to spritz it down with a bit of water, just because it's easier than, just trying to wet the whole thing with a brush. You could use a wash brush, but I don't want to be bothered today. Let me get these out of the way. Okay, so I just want to make sure it's good and wet. It's not pooling and it's not dripping, but I want it nice and wet. The sky doesn't matter, but when we do the grass where the flowers are, that's what we need to make sure remains wet for the first part of the painting. So for the sky, I'm going to use a mixture of Prussian blue and Payne's gray. The Prussian blue can be quite bright and vivid, so I want to make it kind of a little more on the, not gray, but just to knock it down with a bit of gray. Now my palette's new, so I got a lot of beading and it's hard to tell what the wash colors are, so I'm just kind of crossing my fingers. I do have a scrap piece of paper here that I can kind of test this on, I guess, because it's just going to be a wash. And I think I want it a little, just a little bluer than that. So I'll add some more Prussian blue, and that should be good. Now I'm going to just start from the top all the way across. Okay, and then we're going to bring this down. It's going to dry lighter, so I'm going to bring it down to about not quite halfway. And it's always easier to tilt your board a bit when you're dragging a color down like this. And I want to drag it down to pretty much nothing. I can add a little more of the blue because it's quite wet, and it will dry a lot lighter than what we're looking at here. I think that should do. There we go. And then also what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a wet brush and I'm just going to just put some water in here just so we get these kind of blooms and wispy kind of misty values in the sky. You could do clouds if you want. I just want kind of like, you know, lines of mist is the look I'm going for. So now we're going to flip it around and do the grass, and I'm going to use a mixture of sap green because I want it like a fairly bright green, but I want to tone it down just a little bit So I'm going to use some olive green, just so it's not like not like too bright a green. If you don't have olive green, you can just add in a tiny amount of purple just to tone it down a bit. Okay, so we're going to start at the bottom here. Now we have to work quite fast. Like I said, we want the green to the green area to remain wet, and we're going to do the same thing. Drag this all out to almost nothing, not almost nothing. We're going to drag it out to nothing just before we hit the blue area. Okay, just like that. That ought to be good. So you can see we've got our kind of foreground meadow, and then the background, and then the sky. And then what we're going to do is take our clean water and drop a few drops in the foreground, and that's going to give us blooms that will lighten areas where we can put the foreground flowers. Okay, and if it doesn't bloom enough and leave like a light enough space, you can always tap up that pigment with your paper towel. So I'm going to put my size 10 brush away, and for this I'm going to use my size 6, and we're going to use the clean water now. Okay, now when you do this, you can have perfectly round blooms, or you can do them in kind of petally kind of star shapes. It's totally up to you because it is just very loose. So I'm going to put one that's just coming out of the side here, and we'll do one here, and I'm doing this in a little bit of a star shape, so I have some kind of petal shapes. And we'll try one right here. And we'll do another one down here. This might be too wet. It might not bloom out enough. I might have to tap up some color with my paper towel, but that's all good. We'll see. If I had left it longer, it would have bloomed probably a little better, but right now, because it's really wet, it's just coming back into itself. Okay, so I will use my paper towel because it didn't work as much as I wanted. So I'm going to just tap it up. Like so. Okay, so now that it's still wet, we're going to do the flowers in the background. So I'm going to go to my size 0. So we're going to use the same principle here, but I'm going to use have a little bit of tone on my brush, or a little bit of pigment on my brush, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 colors I'm going to use. I'm going to use carmine. I really shouldn't have cleaned it off in my clean water there. Oh well, that's okay. So I'm going to use carmine and some permanent blue violet, and I've got permanent red light here, which is really just an orange, and I've got azo yellow medium. So let's start off with the yellow. Okay, so I've got just a watered down pigment on my brush, and you want to use the size, I'm using the size 0. Use the smallest one you have because we don't want these to bloom out too much, so you don't want a lot of water on your brush, but we're just going to tap some flowers in the background. And this is why you have to work quickly, because you want to make sure that it's still wet and that it's going to bloom out on you. Okay, just like that. Then we'll go and we'll try some orange. Again, it's watered down. And just with the tip of my brush, just going to tap some and they're going to bleed out. And they're going to fade out. So you have to imagine the further they are in the distance, the more faded and smaller they're going to be, and softer edges. I probably shouldn't have done that one. That's okay. Try to refrain from retapping like I'm doing now. So now I'll try some purple ones. Again, I'm just using the tip of this tiny little brush, okay? So you don't need too many. Now as we get closer to the foreground, we're going to make these a little bigger. Now you can see my blooms here, or where I tapped it up, the paint's starting to seep back in. If that happens, you can go back just with your paper towel and try to lift up more of that pigment. The pigment of the flowers in the foreground is going to be heavier, so it's okay if a little bit of that green seeps back in. Okay, so now we're going to do kind of like the mid area. So these flowers are going to be a little bigger. I'm still going to stick with my 0 though, because I want to have control about how much water goes down. Okay, I don't want it too much. And these are going to be a little heavier, a little more pigment than water this time. But they're still going to bloom out and go soft. So did I do all the colors? No, I didn't. I didn't do any red flowers in the background. Hold on. Let's get some red guys back here. The red's really strong. That's okay. Some of these are probably a little bigger than I wanted, but okay, so now we'll do the mid ones. We'll start off with the orange. Like I say, this is going to have a little more pigment than the little flowers in the background. So I'm just going to lay a few of them down, and they're going to bloom out, so don't do them too big. Okay, and they can start to have flower shapes now, but really rough. That actually wasn't watery enough, so I'm just going to add a bit of water with my brush so it'll kind of bloom and soften out a bit. It's kind of trial and error. You might want to do some practicing on the paper that you have just to make sure you're going to get the result that you want. Okay, like that one's good, nice and light. You can do flowers on their side as well. They don't have to be all, facing. Do another purple one here. I'm not going to do too many. We'll get some yellow. Do a yellow one here. That orange one's really bleeding out. I'm going to pick some of that up. Once I added that water to the edge, it just kind of went a little crazy. And then if you find that they're still too light, you just go in and tap in a little extra pigment just to deepen them up a bit. But just err on the side of too light at first. I'm just going to soften the edge of this one so it still looks a little misty. We still want them a little on the misty side. Just like that. Let's do another yellow one. Right about here. Now this is going to be deeper because it's going over the green, and the green's too heavy right now to be pushed away, or the green's too dry to be pushed away, but it's all good. I'm just going to make this one a little more flowery looking. So you can see why you want to use a small brush, because you really want to be able to control this. Okay, I'm just going to soften this edge because my paper's drying. That's why you have to work fast, and it is already drying, but that's okay. And we'll do a red one. I want to go easy on the red because it's pretty vibrant, and I want to keep them pale. Reasonably pale at this point. Just tap in a little pigment just towards the center. And I think that's good enough. Hopefully they'll dry just a little bit lighter. You can always feather the edges like I was doing, just to lighten it up a bit. Okay, so while they're still a little damp, I'm going to go in and get some sepia, which is very dark brown. I want to put some centers in, but I don't want to use black. I want it dark, but not black looking. So I'm just going to tap it in the center. Just like that. Okay, and then I'm going to dry this completely, but I'll speed it up with my heat tool, and then we can come back and do the foreground flowers. Okay, so now this is good and dry, and we're going to go in and do our foreground flowers. And I'm using my number 6 brush because I don't want them too big. And I will do an orange one right here. And I'm just starting them light at first. I can always add pigment after, tap it in, but I just want to not start off too heavy. Now I can tap some pigment in to give them some shape. I just didn't want to go crazy because I don't want them, you know, flat. I don't want them boring. And if that dries too late, we can always go back in. I just tap a little bit of pigment towards the center. Just like that. There's our orange one. And I will do, let's try a yellow one. The yellow one's going to definitely need to be highly pigmented to cover any of the green area. And let's do a yellow one right, now let's do it here. There's a little too much water. So there's our yellow guy. And I think what I'm going to do with this one is maybe add in a little bit of that sepia to have it kind of bleed in. because I want to put the center in while it's still a little wet. And actually I'll put it into the orange one as well. I don't want it to bleed too much. I probably should have waited. It's bleeding a little bit much, but that's okay. We can just pick it up or blend it out. Actually, I like that. Blend it out a little bit. And then let's do a purple one. The purple's quite strong, so let's do a purple one here. And you can do them so they're kind of, you know, so they look like they're on their side a bit, almost like tilted a little. And don't forget, you can go over the green. We're not just, you know, trying to paint right in where that bloom is. So I'm going to dry off my brush. I'm not cleaning it off, I'm just drying it off. And I want to get some heavier pigment. Just tap a little bit. Heavier pigment than that. Just tap a little bit in the center. Or towards the center, rather. So this will bleed out and give it some interest as well. And you don't have to, you can do this with just like, you know, one colored flowers or just a couple of different colors. You don't have to use all these colors that, well, that I have. I just thought, why not? So we'll do a red, whoops, too much water on my brush. Let's do a red one here. That red's really, really strong. Make them a little bigger. Just like that, and I'll go in and get some deeper pigment. You could even make these two-tone flowers if you like. Oh my gosh, look what I did. I dropped some carmine up here, which is okay. It'll just look like a flower in the background, so we'll just... And here too. Oh well, that's all good. So now actually I want to make this purple one just a tad bigger as well. Bring it right down to the foreground there. Because the purple's a stronger color, you can go over the green more than you could, obviously, with the yellow. And I think I'm going to make that red one just a little bit bigger as well. There we go. Just to really make them look like they're up close. And I think I'll do another, there's a lot of purple here. I think I'll do another red one just kind of peeking out here. See what that looks like. There we go. Okay, so while those are still wet, I'm also going to go in with that sepia. And we can just tap. I should probably switch my smaller brush. A little bit more into these guys that were more in the distance. And then back into this yellow guy. This is dry, so it's not going to bleed out so much now. So it's just going to accentuate the centers a bit. This one's still wet, so it will bleed for sure. So there we have the flowers in the foreground. And I think what I want to do, I want to take some really watered down values and just do some more deliberate kind of flowers. But just keep them pale. Okay, so I can even take a little tiny little bit of the sepia, just the slightest amount, and have that kind of fade out. Let's try a red one. Okay, so very pale. That's not very pale, but what I'm going to do is just tap on it with my paper towel just to lighten it a bit, just so it looks like it's more in the mist. That really didn't get much lighter, did it? Okay, we had a bit of a sepia accident over here. I got impatient and put it in way too soon, so it bled out way more than I wanted. So I'm just going to tap that up a bit, and I'm going to go back to my red. Then poke some sepia back in. It should be dry enough now that it's not going to bleed out so much. And this one kind of went bye-bye. So now I'm going to dry those with my heat tool, and then we're going to put some grass in. Okay, so for the grass, I'm going to use that same color and my size 0 brush. I'm going to water it down a bit. Okay, and I'm just going to put a few kind of, whoops, a few little wisps of grass, just with this pale washed out green. Because this brush is so small, it doesn't go a long way because it doesn't hold a lot of pigment. But that's okay. I just don't want it heavy. So I'm just using the tip and just getting the lightest hint of some grasses a little closer to that mid area. I don't want to do it too far in the back because that'll not make it look all misty. Okay, so then as we get closer, of course, to the foreground, they're going to be more deliberate, less transparent, and just with the tip of your brush, just light kind of strokes, and use different values of green. Some of them can go over the flowers. I think as I get more to the foreground, I might go to my bigger brush. I'm going to get my size 6. And then what I will do is I will deepen it and get a darker grass color and put more of that in the foreground. So I'm going to deepen it with a bit of that purple now. Actually, maybe I'll use that kind of bluish sky color too. That'll make it nice and dark. And you don't want to do this with a wet brush. I'm almost just like dry brushing it. You can, I don't know if you can hear it. You can hear like the kind of brush scraping on the paper. Okay. Because if you use too wet a brush, it's just going to start to bleed together. And you don't want that. Okay, so now I'm going to go really dark. Okay, and I think I'll leave it at that. Okay, so I think that's good enough. And now we'll take the tape off and see what it looks like. Let me get my water out of the way. So there is your Misty Meadow Landscape. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that you found it helpful. Maybe give this a try with, you could do all yellow flowers or all purple or whatever, or just do like I did. Pick every color you want. So anyway, that's it for today, guys. Thanks so much for joining me and supporting my channel. As always, take care, and I will see you next time.